Dad looked around the ballroom. One table, then another. He was searching for backup, for someone to laugh, someone to nod, someone to say, well, he does have a point. But nobody did. Not a single person. The silence was louder than anything I'd ever heard. Finally, he pointed at my stack of papers. "Those numbers are twisted," his voice cracked. "You made yourself look like some kind of hero." I stayed calm. No, I documented every transfer. You can verify every one. I looked toward the guests. Every payment came directly from my bank. The statements are attached. A man from the front table, one of Dad's longtime customers, slowly raised his eyebrows. He actually attached bank statements? I did. There was a low murmur across the room. People started leaning toward each other. Not gossiping, processing. Because this wasn't an emotional argument anymore. It was evident.
Dad wasn't ready for evidence. He jabbed a finger toward me. "You wouldn't even have that money if we hadn't raised you." I nodded. "You're right. You raised me. And I'm grateful for that." The room relaxed for just a second. Then I added, "But gratitude isn't debt." Another wave of silence rolled across the ballroom. Even the DJ stood frozen behind his booth. Then, something unexpected happened. Lily stood up. Nobody saw that coming. Not even me. Her hands were shaking. She looked at Dad first, then Mom. Finally, she looked at me. "I need to say something." Dad immediately snapped. "Sit down." She didn't. For the first time in years, she didn't. She took one slow breath. Emma's telling the truth. The room collectively froze. Dad stared at her. "What did you just say?"
I said, "She's telling the truth." Mom whispered, "Lily."
But she kept going. "I've watched her send money for years. I've seen the transfers. I've heard the phone calls. I've heard Dad ask for help over and over again." Dad's face turned bright red. "That's enough." "No." Lily's voice grew stronger. "It's not enough." She looked around the room. I knew about tonight. Several guests exchanged shocked looks. I found the FedEx receipt. I heard Mom and Dad talking. I knew they were planning to hand Emma a bill. Mom covered her face with both hands. Dad took one angry step toward Lily. She didn't move. "I should have warned you sooner," she said, looking at me. "I'm sorry." I felt tears building, but I refused to let them fall. Not yet. Then Ethan quietly stood beside me. He wasn't angry. He wasn't dramatic. He simply wrapped one arm around my shoulders, without saying a word. That single gesture somehow spoke louder than the shouting. His dad, Tom, slowly stood too. He looked directly at my father. "I've got two. If one of them ever offered to help me financially, I'd thank them. I wouldn't send them an invoice." A few people nodded. Then Ethan's mom, Linda, stood beside him. She looked heartbroken. Children aren't investments. They're blessings. Mom finally started crying. Real crying. Not the polite tears she'd shown during the ceremony. Her shoulders shook. Mascara ran down her cheeks. She looked at Dad.
We shouldn't have done this. The room went completely still. Dad stared at her in disbelief. What? We shouldn't have done this. You said people would understand.
She wiped her face.
They don't. They're horrified. Dad looked around again. This time, he finally saw what everyone else had been seeing. No one agreed with him. Not his friends, not his relatives, not his customers, not even his own wife. The room that he thought would validate him had quietly become a room full of witnesses. He grabbed the manila envelope off the table, crumpled it in his fist, then looked at me. His voice was barely above a whisper. You embarrassed me. I looked at him for several seconds before answering. No, Dad. You did that yourself. The moment you decided your daughter's wedding was the right place to collect a bill. Those words seemed to drain every ounce of fight left in him. He looked smaller somehow. Older. Tired. Without another word, he turned toward the exit. Mom hesitated, then slowly followed. Lily stood frozen for a second, before quietly walking after them. The ballroom doors closed behind all three of them. No one moved. No one knew what to say. Then the DJ nervously cleared his throat. He looked at me from across the room. Should I play something? For the first time all evening, I smiled. A real smile. I looked at Ethan, then back at the DJ. Yeah, I laughed softly. Play something people can actually dance to. Within seconds, the opening beat of Dancing Queen filled the ballroom. Someone clapped, then another person. Then the entire room erupted into applause. Not because anyone had won, but because the truth no longer had to hide. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Then the music grew louder. ABBA echoed through the ballroom, almost awkwardly at first, like the DJ wasn't sure if he'd made the right call. I looked around. People were still sitting there, trying to process what had just happened. It felt like everyone had witnessed a car crash in slow motion. Then something unexpected happened. Tom walked onto the dance floor. By himself. He held out his hand toward Linda. Well, he grinned. I refuse to let those folks ruin my son's wedding. Linda laughed through her tears. You always know the right thing to say. No, Tom chuckled. I just know life's too short. She took his hand. A few guests clapped. Someone whistled. Within another minute, Ethan pulled me onto the dance floor. You ready? I looked toward the ballroom doors where my parents had disappeared, then back at him. They've taken enough from me. What do you say we don't let them steal tonight, too? I smiled. For real? He spun me around once. For real. The crowd slowly followed. One couple, then another. Soon the dance floor was full again. Not because everyone had forgotten what happened, because everyone understood something important. My wedding wasn't defined by my father's speech. It was defined by what happened after it. About 20 minutes later, while Ethan was talking with some college friends, Aunt Diane found me near the dessert table. She looked exhausted, like she'd aged 5 years in the last hour. I'm so sorry. I shook my head. You don't owe me an apology. I believed your father. She looked down at the floor.
For years. So did everyone else. She wiped a tear from the corner of her eye. You know what hurts the most? What? I defended him. She laughed bitterly. I actually argued with people who questioned him. I reached over and hugged her. She hugged me back immediately, tighter than I'd expected. I'm done believing stories, she whispered. From now on, I'm checking facts. A few minutes later, one of Dad's oldest customers approached me. His name was Mr. Harper. I'd known him since I was little. He used to give me peppermints every time I visited the lumberyard. He cleared his throat awkwardly. I've known your father nearly 30 years. I nodded. I know. He always joked that raising kids was expensive. I thought he was kidding. He looked genuinely heartbroken.
I'm sorry, Emma. I smiled softly. You don't have anything to apologize for. I know. But I wish I'd asked more questions. That sentence stayed with me. Sometimes people don't believe lies because they're foolish. They believe them because they trust the person telling them. Across the room, Lily quietly walked back inside. She wasn't crying anymore. She looked relieved, like someone who'd been carrying a backpack full of bricks for years and had finally set it down. She walked over carefully. I wasn't sure you'd still want to talk to me. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I pulled her into a hug. She completely broke. I'm sorry. She whispered it over and over against my shoulder. I'm so sorry. I should have said something years ago. I gently rubbed her back. You were surviving too. She looked at me with watery eyes. I always thought if I kept Dad happy, things would get better. Did they? She gave a tiny shake of her head. No.
They just kept getting worse. For the first time in years, we weren't acting like sisters. We actually felt like sisters. Near the end of the reception, Jessica walked over carrying 2 champagne glasses. One for the bride. She handed me a glass. And one for surviving the craziest reception speech I've ever seen. I laughed. You can say that again. She raised her glass. 2 receipts. I laughed harder. Ethan joined us. Tom overheard the conversation. So did I. Within seconds, half our table was raising their glasses. 2 receipts. The entire table burst into laughter. Real laughter. The kind that comes after you've cried so hard, you don't think you'll ever smile again. As the night wound down, guests began leaving one by one. Nearly every person hugged us before walking out. Not because they felt sorry for us, because they respected us. Because they'd watched 2 people choose dignity over revenge. I thought the hardest part of the night was finally over. I was wrong. Because the next morning, my phone exploded with notifications. At first, I ignored them. Ethan and I had checked into a small cabin about an hour outside the city for a short honeymoon getaway. No schedules, no speeches, just peace. Or at least, that was the plan. I reached for my phone while Ethan was making coffee. 32 unread texts, 9 missed calls, 3 voicemails. I blinked. What in the world? Ethan looked over from the kitchenette. Bad? I don't know yet. I opened the first message. Aunt Diane. Emma, I'm so sorry.
I had no idea what was really happening. I love you. The next one. Mr. Harper, you handled yourself with more grace than most people twice your age. Your father made his choice. You made yours. Another. My cousin Brooke. Please don't disappear. None of this is your fault. One after another, the messages kept coming. People weren't asking about the argument. They were apologizing for believing a version of me that had never existed. Ethan set a mug of coffee in front of me. Looks like the truth traveled fast. It really did. Then,
My phone buzzed again. Dad. Not a call. A text. I opened it. My stomach dropped. Hope you're happy. Everyone thinks we're monsters now. That was it. No apology. No regret. Not, are you okay? Not, can we talk? Just blame. I stared at the screen for several seconds. Ethan quietly asked, "What did he say?" I handed him the phone. He read it once, then slowly placed it back on the table. He still doesn't get it. I nodded. No, he really doesn't. About an hour later, another message came through. This one from Mom. Unlike Dad's text, hers was long. Painfully long. Emma, I barely slept last night. I keep replaying everything that happened. Your father believes you humiliated us on purpose. I don't know what to think anymore. I know what we did was wrong, but I also know he's hurting. Please, if you can find it in your heart, call me. I read it twice, then locked my phone. I wasn't ready. Not yet. Some wounds need more than one night before you can even look at them. Around lunchtime, we decided to leave the cabin for a walk through a nearby lakeside park. The weather was perfect. Families were grilling. Kids were chasing ducks. Someone was playing country music from a picnic table. Life kept moving. It always does. We found an empty bench overlooking the water. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. You know what impressed me the most yesterday? What? You never tried to embarrass your parents. I looked at him. You simply refused to let them embarrass you. I'd never thought about it that way. Maybe he was right. The goal had never been revenge. The goal had been truth. That evening, another notification appeared. This time,
it wasn't from my parents. It was from Lily. Can we meet when you get back? Just us. Please. I smiled, then replied, "Of course." Almost instantly, 3 little dots appeared. She was typing. "There's something you don't know." I frowned. About what? A full minute passed before her next message arrived. About the money. Now she had my attention. What do you mean? Another pause. Then, Dad didn't need as much help as he said. I sat up straighter. Ethan noticed immediately. What happened? I handed him the phone.
He read the messages, then looked back at me. I had a feeling. So did I, but I never wanted to believe it. My phone buzzed again. One final message from Lily. There are things Mom never told you, and I think you deserve to know everything. I looked out across the lake.
The water was perfectly still. But inside me, another storm was starting. Because I realized the wedding wasn't the end of the story. It was only the moment that finally forced all the hidden truths into the light. And whatever Lily was about to tell me had the potential to change everything I thought I knew about my family. The wedding was over. The honeymoon ended. But Lily's last text stayed stuck in my head the entire drive home.
Dad didn't need as much help as he said. There are things Mom never told you. I read those 2 messages at least 20 times. Every mile down the highway made me more anxious. By Monday afternoon, I texted her. Me. Coffee? Just us. She replied almost immediately. Lily. Thursday, 6 p.m., Maple Street Cafe. No emojis, no small talk. Just a time and a place. That told me everything. Thursday came. I arrived 10 minutes early. The cafe smelled like fresh coffee beans and cinnamon rolls, but my stomach was too tight to enjoy any of it. Lily walked in wearing a gray hoodie and jeans. She looked exhausted. Dark circles under her eyes. No makeup. No fake smile. She sat across from me without saying a word. The waitress asked what we'd like. Just coffee, Lily said quietly. Once we were alone again, she stared into her cup. I almost didn't. Come, I figured. I've been scared. Of Dad? She nodded. Always. That answer hit me harder than I expected, because I'd spent years thinking I was the only one walking on eggshells. Finally, she looked up. You remember all those emergencies? The roof, the surgery, the taxes, the renovations? I nodded. Of course. She swallowed. Most of them were real.
My shoulders relaxed slightly. But, she continued, they weren't as bad as Dad claimed. What do you mean? She reached into her purse, then slid a small envelope across the table. Inside were photocopies, bank statements, store financial reports, repair estimates. I looked up. What is all this? I copied them before I moved out. You moved out? She smiled weakly. 3 days after your wedding. I blinked. What? I couldn't stay there anymore. I started reading. The first document was for the roof. Dad had told me it cost almost $15,000. The actual invoice was less than $8,000. I frowned. Maybe I was reading it wrong. Then came the renovation. He'd asked me for $22,000. The contractor's final bill? Just under $12,000. I turned another page. His knee surgery? Insurance had covered far more than he'd admitted. The amount he'd asked me to send was nearly double his actual out-of-pocket. I slowly looked back at Lily. She nodded before I could finish. Yeah. He inflated almost everything. I felt like someone had knocked the air out of my lungs. So, where did the rest go? Lily looked away. I don't know all of it, but I know some. She wrapped both hands around her coffee mug. Dad hated debt. I know. But he also hated anyone knowing he had debt. I waited. The hardware store wasn't failing. It was surviving. The problem? He kept borrowing money.
business loans, equipment loans, a line of credit. He never told anyone. So, I whispered,
My money was paying his loans?
partly, and partly, she hesitated again, to keep up appearances. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. For years, I thought I was helping save the family. Instead, I'd been helping protect my father's pride. I wanted to tell you, Lily's voice cracked, so many times. Why didn't you? She laughed sadly. Because every time I questioned him, he'd say the same thing. Family sticks together. And if that didn't work, he'd remind me everything he'd ever paid for. The room suddenly felt very familiar. Different cafe, same manipulation. Different child, same script. I leaned back in my chair. So the wedding invoice? Lily actually rolled her eyes. That was mostly my dad. My mom hated the idea. I frowned. She did? She cried the night before. She begged him not to do it. What changed? Lily shrugged. He said if she loved him, she'd support him. I closed my eyes. There it was again. Everything had a price, even loyalty. Before we left, Lily reached into her purse one last time. She handed me a small flash drive. What's this? Copies. Everything I could save.
Bank records, emails, invoices, store reports. I stared at it.
Why are you giving this to me?
She smiled sadly. Because somebody in this family deserves the truth. As I slipped the flash drive into my purse, I realized something that honestly broke my heart. My father hadn't just been keeping score. He'd been changing the numbers. And somehow, that betrayal hurt even more than the invoice he handed me at my wedding. I drove home with the flash drive sitting in my purse like it weighed 50 pounds. It was just a tiny piece of plastic. But somehow, it felt heavier than every check I'd ever written. When I walked through the front door, Ethan looked up from the couch. How'd it go? I pulled the flash drive out and held it up. Lily brought receipts. He raised an eyebrow. The real kind? The real kind. That night, after dinner, we opened my laptop. I plugged in the flash drive. For a second, nothing happened. Then folders began appearing across the screen. Store financials, loan statements, invoices, insurance claims, bank transfers. There were hundreds of files. Some scanned, some photographed, some downloaded straight from online banking. Lily hadn't copied a few papers. She'd copied years of records. Ethan leaned closer. Wow. I don't think she planned this overnight. No, I shook my head. She's been preparing to leave for a long time. The first file we opened made my stomach turn. It was a contractor's invoice for the hardware store renovation. Final payment? $11,684. I closed my eyes. Dad had asked me for $22,000. Almost double. Another file. The roof replacement. Final invoice? $7,912. Again, almost half of what I'd been told. Then came the knee surgery paperwork. Insurance explanation of benefits. Actual patient responsibility? Just over $4,800. I'd sent him nearly $10,000. I leaned back in my chair.
I couldn't even be angry anymore. I was exhausted. Ethan quietly reached over and squeezed my hand. You weren't helping with emergencies. You were funding a lie. For the next 2 hours, we kept opening files. Every answer created 2 new questions. There were business loans I'd never heard about, credit card balances, late fees, interest payments. Dad wasn't broke. He was drowning in debt because he refused to admit he needed professional help. Instead, he kept asking me.
The easiest source of money he'd ever had. His daughter. Around 10 o'clock, my phone rang. Mom. I stared at the screen. Ethan looked at me. You don't have to answer. I thought about it, then took a deep breath. I think I do, I answered. Hello? For a few seconds, all I heard was breathing. Finally, she spoke. I heard you met with Lily. I did. Silence. Then she quietly asked, Did she tell you everything? I don't think that's possible. Mom let out a tired sigh. No, I guess it isn't. Her voice sounded different. Not defensive, not angry, just tired. So why are you calling? I wanted to tell you something before your father finds out. I didn't interrupt. He doesn't know Lily copied those records. That surprised me. He doesn't? No. If he did? She stopped herself. What? He would have destroyed them. The room suddenly felt colder. I should have protected you, Mom whispered.
I didn't. I closed my eyes. There it was. The sentence I'd waited my whole life to hear. Not an excuse, not a justification. An admission. I was scared. She continued. Your grandfather controlled your father. Then your father controlled me. I convinced myself that's just how marriage worked. I quietly asked, And your daughters? Her voice cracked. I failed both of you. Neither of us spoke for almost a minute. Finally, I asked the question that had lived inside me for years. Mom, did you ever think what he was doing was normal? She answered immediately. No. Then why didn't you stop him? I heard her crying. Because every time I tried, he'd remind me I had nowhere else to go. That sentence broke something inside me. Not because it excused her, because it explained her. Fear had kept her trapped, just like guilt had kept me writing checks. Before hanging up, she said one last thing. Emma, your father thinks the money was the biggest secret.
I frowned. What does that mean? She hesitated. There was something else. Something in her voice made my heart race. What? I can't tell you over the phone. Then tell me in person. Another long pause. I will, if you're willing to listen. The call ended. I slowly lowered the phone. Ethan looked at me. More secrets? I nodded. Apparently, I still don't know the whole story. I glanced back at the laptop filled with years of financial records. Just an hour ago, I thought I'd finally reached the truth. Now, I wasn't so sure. Because sometimes, money isn't the biggest lie a family keeps. Sometimes, it's only the easiest one to count. Sometimes, the hardest meeting of your life
isn't with your enemy. It's with the person who stayed silent while everything was falling apart. 3 days after Mom's phone call, she texted me, "Can we meet somewhere your father won't find us?" I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I replied, "Saturday, 1 o'clock, Riverside Park." She answered with one word, "Thank you." Saturday arrived cold and windy. The park was nearly empty except for a few joggers and parents pushing strollers. I spotted Mom sitting on a bench overlooking the river. For the first time in years, she looked small. Not physically, emotionally. Like someone carrying
Decades of regret. She stood when she saw me. Neither of us moved in for a hug. We weren't there yet. "Thanks for coming," she said quietly. I almost didn't. I wouldn't have blamed you. We sat in silence for nearly a minute. The river drifted by. Leaves floated across the water. Finally, she reached into her purse and handed me a worn envelope. The edges were faded. The paper was yellow with age. "What's this?" "I should have given it to you years ago."
I opened it carefully. Inside was a folded letter. My name was written across the front, in handwriting I didn't recognize. I looked up. Who wrote this? Mom swallowed hard. "Your grandmother." "My dad's mother?" She nodded. "She wrote it before she passed away." I blinked. I never even knew she left me a letter. "You weren't supposed to." I unfolded the paper. The first line stopped me cold. "Dear Emma, if you're reading this, then I wasn't brave enough to tell you these things myself." I looked at Mom. "You kept this from me?" Tears filled her eyes. "Gary found it first." My stomach tightened. "He said it would only cause problems." "So he hid it?" She nodded. "And I let him." I kept reading. My grandmother wrote about Dad as a little boy. She described him as kind, gentle, always smiling. Then one paragraph caught my attention. "Your grandfather believed love had to be earned. Gary spent his childhood trying to earn something that should have been free." I stopped reading. The words echoed in my mind. Mom quietly said, "Your father wasn't born this way." I know. He became this way. She looked across the river before continuing. "Your grandfather made Gary pay for everything." I frowned. "What do you mean? If Gary broke a window?" It went into a notebook. If he needed new shoes, it went into the notebook. If he borrowed $5, it went into the notebook. I felt chills run down my arms. The notebook? Mom nodded slowly. "The same habit your father used on you." Suddenly, everything made horrible sense. Dad hadn't invented the system. He inherited it. "That doesn't excuse what he did," I said firmly. "No," Mom agreed immediately. "It doesn't. But I think you deserve to understand where it started." She wiped away another tear. "I spent years hoping he'd become the man I met when we were 19. What happened? He never stopped trying to prove he was worth something. So he measured everything. Money, work, sacrifice, even love." I looked back down at Grandma's letter. Near the bottom was one final paragraph. "If Gary ever starts counting what his children cost him, please remind him that parents choose to bring children into this world.
Children never choose the dead. My hands started shaking. She had seen it coming, decades before it happened. Mom finally looked me in the eyes. I failed you. You also failed Lily. She nodded. I know. I'll spend the rest of my life wishing I'd stood up sooner. I believed her. Not because the pain disappeared, but because for the first time, she wasn't asking me to make her feel better. She was simply telling the truth. As we stood to leave, she surprised me. I filed for separation. I froze. What? I moved into your Aunt Diane's guest room last week. I stared at her.
33 years of marriage. Over.
I can't keep living inside someone else's ledger.
She gave me a sad smile. I finally realized something.
What?
A marriage built on fear isn't a marriage. For a second, I didn't know what to say. So I stepped forward, and for the first time since my wedding, I hugged my mother. She cried into my shoulder. Not because everything was fixed, because healing had finally begun. As I watched her walk toward her car, Grandma's letter rested safely inside my purse. I thought the wedding invoice had been the final chapter of my family's story. I was wrong, because Dad still hadn't said a single word. And when he finally did, it wouldn't be to apologize. It would be because he had just lost the one thing he never thought could leave him. For almost 3 weeks, life felt strangely peaceful. No surprise phone calls, no guilt trips,
No requests for money.
it was
Quiet. Honestly, I'd forgotten what quiet sounded like. Ethan and I settled into our routine. Weekdays were filled with work. Evenings meant homemade dinners, walks around the neighborhood, and arguing over what movie to watch. It wasn't exciting. It was normal. And after everything we'd been through, normal felt like a luxury. Then, one rainy Tuesday evening, someone knocked on our front door. 3 slow knocks. Not loud, not impatient, just heavy. Ethan looked through the window beside the door. His expression changed. Emma, it's your dad. My heart sank. For a moment, I considered pretending we weren't home. Then I remembered something my grandmother had written. Truth doesn't need to hide. I took a deep breath. I'll handle it. When I opened the door, I barely recognized him. Gary looked older. Not by years, by defeat. His shoulders were slumped. His beard hadn't been trimmed. The confidence he'd worn like armor my entire life was gone. He held a plain white envelope in one hand. Not a manila envelope, just plain white. The irony wasn't lost on me. Can we talk? His voice was barely above a whisper. I looked at Ethan. He gave me a small nod. I'll be in the kitchen if you need me. I stepped onto the porch and quietly closed the door behind me. The rain had slowed to a light drizzle. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, Dad held out the envelope. This is for you. I didn't take it. What is it? The original agreement. The one you signed when you were 17. I stared at him. You kept it all these years? He nodded. I burned every copy. Except that he looked down at the envelope in his hands. I almost burned this one too. But I figured it belongs to you. I slowly accepted it. The paper felt damp from the rain. "So?" I asked quietly. "Why are you here?" He let out a long breath. "The store." "What about it?" "I sold it." I blinked. "You what?" "Last week." My mind raced. That hardware store had been in our family for generations. Dad had built his entire identity around it. "You always said you'd never sell." "I know. So what changed?" He laughed softly. It wasn't a happy laugh.
It stopped feeling like a family business. It started feeling like a prison. He leaned against the porch railing. I spent 30 years trying to prove I was successful. To who? My father. The answer didn't surprise me anymore. He's been gone for years. I know. But somehow, I kept trying anyway. Rain dripped from the edge of the roof. Dad rubbed his hands together. You know what hurt the most after the wedding? I waited. It wasn't the guests. It wasn't the gossip. It wasn't even your spreadsheet. He looked directly at me. It was realizing I couldn't remember the last time I told you I was proud of you. I felt my chest tighten. He continued. I remembered every dollar.
But I couldn't remember saying, "Good job, kid." His voice cracked. I don't know what kind of father forgets something like that. Neither did I. For the first time in my life, my father looked scared. Not angry, not defensive, scared. I don't expect forgiveness, he said. I don't even expect another chance. He stopped. His eyes filled with tears. I needed you to know. I finally understand. I searched his face. For years, I'd wished to hear those words. Now that they were here, they didn't magically erase the past. But they mattered. Because they were real. I opened the envelope. Inside was the old agreement I'd signed at 17. Across the front, written in blue ink, were 4 words. Paid in full. Below that, Dad had written another sentence. You never owed me anything. I looked up. He gave me the saddest smile I'd ever seen. I should have figured that out a long time ago. The rain finally stopped. For a long moment, neither of us said anything. Some silences are uncomfortable. This one wasn't. It was simply honest. As Dad turned and slowly walked toward his truck, I realized something. The contract had finally ended. Not because the paper changed, because the people holding it finally had. And for the first time in my life, I watched my father walk away without feeling like I owed him a single thing. I stood on the porch long after Dad's truck disappeared around the corner. The envelope was still in my hands. Rainwater had smudged the blue ink just enough to blur the words, paid in full. For years, I thought those were the words I wanted to hear. Turns out, they weren't. The words I had needed all along were much simpler. I'm sorry. Not because an apology could erase 30 years. It couldn't. But because accountability is where healing begins. I walked back inside.
Ethan looked up from the kitchen table. How'd it go? I smiled, exhausted but lighter somehow. I think he finally stopped keeping score. Ethan wrapped me in a hug. Neither of us said anything else. Some moments don't need commentary. They just need peace. Over the next few months, life settled into a rhythm I had never experienced before.
The first of the month came and went. No phone calls asking for money, no emergencies, no guilt. Just silence. Instead of sending $2,000 away, I watched that money grow in our savings account, then into our investment account, then into the college fund Ethan and I had started. It wasn't about having more money. It was about finally having choices. That felt priceless. Mom rented a small apartment across town. Nothing fancy. Just one bedroom, a tiny balcony, and a kitchen she proudly called all mine. The first time Ethan and I visited, she insisted on cooking dinner. Halfway through the meal, she laughed. You know what's funny? What? I bought real butter. I looked at her, confused.
She smiled. I didn't even think about how much it cost. We both laughed. It sounded small, but it wasn't. Sometimes healing shows up in ordinary moments. Lily threw herself into her new job. A few weeks later, she invited me out for lunch. No family drama, no secret documents. Just two sisters eating tacos and laughing about childhood memories that had nothing to do with money. For the first time in years, we were building a relationship that belonged to us, not one managed by someone else's expectations. As for Dad, things changed slowly. He started volunteering twice a week at the local community center, helping teenagers learn basic woodworking. One Saturday, Aunt Diane called. "You'll never believe what your father did." "What?" "A little boy accidentally broke a hammer." I smiled. "Let me guess. He told the kid, 'Don't worry, accidents happen.' No lecture, no bill, no notebook, just kindness." I sat quietly after the call ended. Maybe people really can change. Not all at once, not perfectly, but one choice at a time. Nearly a year after the wedding, Ethan and I hosted Thanksgiving at our house. Everyone came. Mom, Lily, Aunt Diane, Tom and Linda, even Dad. I'll admit, I was nervous. Dinner started quietly. Then, just before dessert, Dad stood up. For a split second, every muscle in my body tightened. He noticed. A faint smile crossed his face. "I know," he said. "I've earned that reaction." A few people chuckled. He looked around the table. "I only want to say one thing." He turned toward me. "Emma, I spent too many years measuring what things cost. I forgot to measure what they were worth." His eyes filled with tears. "You were always worth more than anything I ever gave you." The room fell silent. Then he added, "And from now on, no more ledgers. No more keeping score. Just family." No one clapped. No one needed to. Because this time, his words weren't a performance. They were Later that night, after everyone had gone home, Ethan and I sat on our back porch. The stars were bright. The air was cold. Our cat, Penny, curled up beside my feet. Ethan slipped his hand into mine. "So, you think this story's finally over?" I smiled. "No. It's just finally becoming the kind of story I always wanted. The one where love isn't earned,
It isn't calculated, and it never arrives with an invoice. If one thing came out of everything my family went through, it's this. You can break a cycle without breaking your heart. Sometimes the bravest thing you'll ever do is refuse to pass old pain on to the next generation. And that's exactly what we're going to do. Love is never a debt. Kindness should never come with a receipt. And the greatest inheritance you can leave your children isn't money. It's the freedom to know they'll always be loved without conditions. If someone ever handed you an invoice for being loved, tell me about it in the comments. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you never miss one. Thank you for listening.